Thank you very much for having us. A slightly different take on the last conversation, or the last talk that we just had from Douglas. I'm from a company called LGC, and we have a similar platform. Some differences between the two, but rather than go through some of the same information again, we thought we'd take a different tact with coming after Douglas in the talk. So we thought we'd go on to a lot of the questions that I get asked from customers when they're considering what do they need to buy, or how do they decide whether to insource or outsource. So I'll go through a few points. Why would you do outsourcing? Considerations, success factors, a case study that we've been working with recently. You can see the points. So firstly, the real challenge is, with all the data available, is deciding what to do. Generate the data, interpreting the data, and how most effectively to employ data and information that is available. But that actually just boils down to a decision: do you do that yourself, or do you actually partner with a third party? And that's actually the question that we get asked as a service business and an equipment supplier. We get asked that a lot. It's one of the biggest conversations that we have with our customers. Should we use your service? Should we buy your equipment? And why buy your equipment over somebody else's? So the main consideration that most people consider is money. Money is normally the thing that makes the world go round, so it's generally CapEx versus OpEx. So a couple of questions that people tend to have to ask themselves is, do you have a budget and funding to be able to buy the equipment? If you are buying equipment, can you afford the depreciation? That's fairly important. You need to be doing enough data points. It's going to make it worthwhile that you can actually afford the equipment that you're going to buy. If you're going to be doing 1 million data points over a year, there's no point buying a large snip line system from LGC or an XR system, because the depreciation would take forever to actually pay that back. But that is versus the cost of actually outsourcing. There's obviously a benefit to the company who is getting the outsourced work. There's a cost impact in that to you guys as well. Then there's the capability. Does your partner have the needs that you want? And do they have the best platforms that meet your needs for now and in the future? But also, if you're going to do that yourself, are you going to be able to plan for your needs now and in the future? So, as we just had in the last conversation, the last presentation, a lot of the presentations that we've had earlier today were at the early stages of the breeding process, and that's where NGS and sequencing is very applicable. So you don't necessarily want to be looking at endpoint genotyping, high throughput genotyping systems if you're at that stage. So just making sure that you're checking the systems that are at a stage where you're at, but also that they'll work for you moving forward. And whatever technology you choose needs to be able to deliver. Turnaround times in the ag world, more than anywhere else, is vitally important. How quickly do you need the data? Can you do it as quick as you need? And do a service company actually have a bigger capacity than what you would have to be able to deliver the data quicker? Peaks and troughs. It's actually something that people don't always consider when they're buying equipment. But you often find in this example here, in this example, we have this blue line is the limit of where your capacity would actually scale up to. These peaks here, you can buy equipment which will be able to do the work up to this blue line. Whenever you get a peak, rather than having to buy equipment to cover the whole of the top line, the highest peak, you can actually use a service lab to just cover these peaks for you. That way, you have no commitment. When you have peak periods, demand, you can outsource that work. Alternatively, you can go with a partnership. So you can always have a baseline that's always supported by a service provider. You have the equipment to fill the gap, but then whenever you do have peaks, you know you've got the guarantee that this service provider is used to working with you, used to getting your samples, and you can send stuff directly to them. And then finally, there's full capacity where you scale up all the way to cover the complete capacity that you'll need for the whole of your breeding process. Integration is another major feature, integration and efficiency. Do you get back the data in a viable format? So often you may decide that you don't want to work with a company because the data isn't applicable, or you've got to put a lot of things in place to actually understand that data. There's a decision on where to best utilise your staff and their expertise, and it's core to the business. Is it something you actually have experience in? Is it something you want to gain experience in? Is it something that you don't need the experience, but an outsourcing company has more of that experience? And you need that fit with any partner. So can they accommodate the service that you need? And do they fit with your organisation and your ethos? Probably one of the bigger things is the technology improvements and choice. Deciding which technology to use is a difficult choice. As Gary said, we've got a meeting later this week where we'll be discussing several technologies, but I've no doubt in 5 years' time, technologies will change, if 5 years. So technology is always upgrading, it's keeping up with that. If you're buying equipment in yourself, then you have to actually keep up with the new technologies. Using a service provider, you expect them to keep up with the technologies. The long-term goals of your organisation. You may decide that, yes, using a service provider now would make sense, but you may have aspirations that you want to get business from elsewhere in the globe. You may want to be a service centre yourselves. So it may make sense that you don't have the capacity yourself today, but you want to scale up and grow into that capacity. And probably the biggest thing is actually the software and LIMS that is needed to support any service lab. So it's not necessarily the software that comes with equipment, it's the supporting software that needs to look after the sample from arrival all the way to the data leaving. And then you also have to consider the risks of data confidentiality and longevity. So they're pretty much decisions that we would work through with a customer and make sure that they were comfortable with when they come to us to ask that question. So what are the advantages of outsourcing? Some of these I've mentioned, so I'll be quick, bearing the time. But cost effectiveness, economies of scale. An outsourcing lab tends to be able to work with many customers, probably has more capacity than what you have today. So they should be able to get economy of scale in terms of reagent costs, consumable costs, etc. And you don't have to have that initial upfront spend on the equipment. So the equipment nowadays, it tends to be hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not more. Reagents and consumables, again, you have to consider not just the reaction mix or plates or arrays, but it's the tips, the chemicals, and other ancillaries that you would have to have in your lab. And staff. Lots of experience, knowledge, and understanding is needed. So one thing you tend to get with a service lab is that they've had that experience. However, there's lots of customers who actually want to gain that experience. So if you can work with the service lab to transfer that knowledge, it gives you a real benefit as well. And then there's the general building costs. I'll just quickly flick through. As I said before, you get a greater breadth of technology. It may not be, maybe that one service provider doesn't provide all of these, but you can utilise more than one service provider. Because as I said before, you probably won't be using GBS at the same time as the low-plex genotyping platforms. And then there's reduced risk in terms of yourselves. However, there are advantages to insourcing, so you have greater control. That can be perceived, but there is a level of greater control. Your data is going to integrate directly into whatever LIMS system you're using today. You've got no questions over confidentiality or any integrity of the data that you're supplying or retrieving from a service provider. There's a different type of cost. So you may have costs that are actually built into your organisation already. Staff costs are sometimes taken into account. So you don't have to calculate that when you're looking at data point costs. Gives you capacity for future expansion. And you then get that economy of scale I was talking about that service lab probably already has. And one of the key things is that expansion of skills. So we're talking about Africa and the knowledge that we were gaining in Africa. These type of things are key for developing these technologies in countries moving forward. So LGC, we've been around for a long time. Since the late 1800s. We're a UK company. We started off as a measurement company, basically trying to get taxes from people who are trying to import tobacco and potatoes. Ever since, we've been doing standards. So the National Measurement Institute, it's similar to NIST in North America. But we have 4 divisions. The division that I work for is the genomics, and we deal with a lot of the ag bio customers. So we have a service lab, we provide equipment, and we provide chemistries. So we do have working models. We've worked for several years with the GCP. We've developed 12 crops, or worked with 12 crops, developing over 16,000 assays. Over 500 customer projects have been run in our UK lab, and we've generated over 30 million data points in that 5-year period. Now those data points don't come in as 1 million data point projects at a time. One week we may get no work, another week we may get 100,000 data points, the following week we may get 10,000 data points. There's a real combination and a mixture that's made up that 30 million data points. And as Howard mentioned earlier this morning, we're one of the partners with the African Orphan Crop Consortium. So these guys are already using our services. This is purely our lab services at the moment, whereas with the African Orphan Crop, we're actually sending our plant scientists out to Nairobi and places like that, and we're training the breeders how to actually sample the plants and being involved in that training process. So we were part of the breeding university that's been set up in Nairobi. So we have a case study. Company I've been working with, they want to do a 6-month study where they want to do 1,000 extractions a day, over 1,000 CASP assays. But it was a proof of principle. They had a much bigger plan. So they couldn't get the justification to do this in-house. So they decided to use us as a partner. We perform all of that work in our service lab. Their ultimate plan was to have a 2-year scale-up where they wanted to get to the point they were doing 30,000 extractions per day over only 100 assays, but that would be 600 million data points per annum. Now they couldn't get to this point unless they had this point, but they couldn't get the justification through their board, so they sent it through as service work. It got approved, so they're now on this stage, and we're actually working with them where we're sending some of our scientists into their lab. So they have our equipment, our chemistry, our scientists are working in their lab for a 4-month period to get them up to speed, to see them through the scale up. It's a big jump to go and start doing 30,000 extractions a day. But they also have that backup and support of our service lab still. And we have a sniff line. It's a modular system, so different from the last one that you saw, where we have individual pieces of equipment. Allows flexibility, low volume dispensing, 1 microliter dispensing in 15 36-well plates, and a simple system with these pieces of equipment here can do anything from 1 million to 50 million data points per annum. Just some final thoughts. There's no right or wrong answer. It's typically down to the organisation themselves. All those points that I've just mentioned, people will pick up positives and negatives about each of them and then make a decision on what's right for them. So there really is no right or wrong. It's more just what's the objective of your program, what resources you have available, expertise in your team, partnerships, what's the chosen solution, what volume you want to get down to, and what fit there is. So all of these things get taken into account, but as I say, there's no right or wrong answer. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time. And I won't keep you, but we do have a booth outside where we've got myself and 2 of my colleagues who will be there over the next couple of days. If you want to know any information about any of the equipment or chemistry or service labs, please give us a shout. Thank you very much.
You say you have 33 locations. What's their distribution across the continents, like North America, Europe, Asia, Africa?
Did I say 23?
I thought there was 33 and like 2,000 employees. Did I read that wrong?
Oh, sorry, yes, there are. We have, as part of LGC, the wider LGC, we have sites in every continent, China, Asia, Australia, Centred out of the UK and North America, we have key labs. Our genomics facilities are based in the UK, Germany and North America. So we have 3 genomics facilities where we're doing service work.
I have only one comment that outsourcing is a very good idea. Instead of insourcing, outsourcing free you from lots of botheration of maintaining the equipment and servicing and all these things. But you guys are not reaching to many of the users. So at that level you must do something that you reach to many more users in the universities and institutions.
So there are a couple of considerations in that. So one is cost. So customers pooling samples, pooling information, pooling data, or pooling requests makes the cost a lot more cost effective. But what we're doing is we've been working with the IDP to try and collaborate with them to actually utilize their breeding platform, get more people to use that breeding platform and come directly to us. So there's a plan in place with Jean Marcel and the team to actually have people go through the IDP to utilize LGC's genotyping services. So they should become more widely available, but more visible, more importantly.
Okay, we're moving on to the next presentation. Thank you very much, Stephen.